What if an ecosystem you grew up with, one you thought would always be there, disappeared pretty much overnight? On this episode of Conservation Hackers, we speak to Dr. Megan Saunders, who experienced just that. She talks about restoration science and how experiences in seeing these ecosystems disappeared inspired her to become a scientist and work on restoration. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Brown. Now let's hear from Megan.
Hi, I'm Dr. Megan Saunders from CSIRO Oceans and Atmosphere based in Brisbane. So when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time on a small island in British Columbia. We had amazing kelp forests around the island, and they supported lots of unique creatures and were great spots for fishing, particularly salmon. When I was growing up, one year that kelp started disappearing. It was practically there one day and gone the next. And what we observed was that big red sea urchins, fronts of them, had come along and grazed away the kelp. After not too long, the kelp beds nearby our place no longer existed, and that changed the way that we interacted with the coast and the types of animals, including fish, that were there. So decades later, there's still no kelp. We've just been at Hornby Island, having a look around, snorkeling and talking to people here, and there's really no kelp left. Not only on this island, but in lots of other islands in the Strait of Georgia. Well, something really interesting has happened. So although it's very, very gloomy and disturbing that kelp has disappeared, over the past decade there has been an interesting shift that is cause for optimism, and that's that a number of large whales, like humpback whales, have resumed a migration up the Strait of Georgia, and you can see them from the island here. And this never happened when I was younger. Whales obviously had a long legacy of hunting. In fact, there's a bay on this island called Whaling Station Bay. The name is pretty descriptive. So it's great that we can observe in conservation, when you do take strong action to protect something, that their numbers can have the ability to rebound. My research really focuses on ecological restoration in coastal marine ecosystems. And to date, a lot of restoration in these systems, we're talking about kelp, coral, salt marsh, mangroves, oysters, seagrass, has been typically quite small scale and typically fairly expensive. And there's also been somewhat variable rates of success. So some of my earlier work, this was led by Eliza Bayraktarov, we were interested in the cost of restoration and how successful it might be, or its feasibility. What we mean by feasibility is the probability that your project might succeed or fail. And this was really important for some understanding. This was important for some modeling work that we were trying to do, which sought to understand whether or not it'd be more cost effective to restore ecosystems or protect them from becoming degraded in the first place. What we discovered when we started looking for those numbers is that there was no consistent picture and no real synthesis of how much restoration in coastal marine ecosystems costs and how likely it is to succeed. When we gathered all those data, Eliza gathered the data from around the world from publicly available sources. We found that yes, it was on average quite expensive, on the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars per hectare, and with really variable success rates. As we've identified restoration projects across all coastal marine ecosystems worldwide, which are highly successful across a suite of metrics. These are projects that might have been done over really large scales. They might have been successful persisted over long time durations. They might have been done really cost effectively or have evidence of rapid patch expansion. And lastly, really interesting, some of these projects have examples of social and economic benefits that they provide to communities. And this is so important because these are ecological systems. A lot of people do it for ecological reasons, but restoration is a human activity, and the social, economic, other cultural benefits that we get from restoration are a really important part of the business case. They're also really important for determining the success of the project. So when you have really strong community leadership and involvement, restoration projects tend to be a lot more successful. Restoration to date tends to be quite fairly small scale, as I mentioned, and that's to do with some of the social and political governance and funding reasons or limitations of restoration. But me and many others have visions of how we can scale up This is really important for meeting international commitments like the Paris Agreement, the CBD Aichi targets, and others. And as we scale up, restoration has to move beyond kind of patch and demonstration scale. And to do this means that we're going to need to cover large areas, and the funding may not be sufficient to do everywhere. This problem can be partially resolved through strategic planning or conservation planning. And this is a method that uses data, ecological data, social data, economic data, to try and understand the places where you can achieve the maximum benefit for the least cost. And so I think this is a really exciting opportunity in the field of restoration ecology, in terms of using spatial data and spatial models to understand where we can achieve the maximum benefit.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube. And don't forget to share us with friends and colleagues. It's the #1 way we can reach more people. If you want to hear more from this show, hit subscribe down below. I'm Dr. Chris Brown, and this has been the Conservation Hackers vlog.